Weekly Download, a podcast about interesting games, industry news.
Brought to you by Big Games Machine.
He's a chill guy. That's Rocky's dog, Alex. For the listeners,
Rocky's
he's a
dog.
He's a very
Alex.
chill guy. Alex's dog, Rocky, even not Rocky. Introducing Rocky's pet, Alex, to the show.
That's me.
Oh, but hello, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back to the Weekly Download. It is I, Tom, and today again I am joined by Alex. Alex, why don't you
This is
introduce
becoming a regular
yourself to
thing.
everyone? It is.
I enjoy my Thursday recordings with you, Tom.
It is.
Yeah, no,
Good. We don't enjoy any of the other time we spend together, but we do enjoy this. That's the.
I'm Alex, and I am head of consumer PR and marketing here at good old Big Games Machine, which brings you the
Very
weekly
knowledgeable.
download and the daily download and everything
All the
else. Tom
downloads.
puts a load of
We'll
work
plug
into.
them at the end. But something we need to plug before we get into today's episode is, Alex, a birdie tells me that you're up to something pretty cool next week. So why don't you quickly tell everyone about that?
I'm always excited for these. I'm doing the Big Indie Pitch, the judging at the Big Indie Pitch, Pocket Gamer Connects London, which is this amazing, it's a panel. There's generally around 2 to 3 people on each kind of judging group. And then it cycles around, you get 6 developers that come around and they either show you their game or they show you their pitch, and they do their elevator pitch, tell you why their game's going to be amazing. And then you get maybe 6 rounds of that. So you see 36 games in the space of 3 hours, and it's exhausting, but absolutely fantastic. And you always see, you always see incredible games. They're 2 of my favorite games that we've worked on recently, actually. Name of the Will and the Mad King Redemption. I met both of them via doing the Big Indie Pitch, and I was a massive advocate of them during the panels for that. So yeah, excited to be going to that next week. So I'll be doing the PC panel on Tuesday.
Keep an eye. That is Tuesday the 20th. Tuesday the 20th of January. That's at Pocket Gamer Connects London. So if you're interested in going, if you're interested in seeing us, in meeting Alex, I'm sure he'll be very busy judging, but if he has the time, then be sure to get in touch on LinkedIn or send us a message, and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
We'll see if we can get some time with Alex.
I absolutely should give a shout out to Jupiter Hadley, who runs the Big Indie Pitch, because she does an amazing job pulling in these fantastic indie developers. I've just outlaid what I'm going to do. There will be a mobile track as well, because I'm on the PC game list, PC and console game. So there's a lot of fantastic indies that get moved through there from all over the world. So yeah, it's going to be
exciting times. And maybe in the future we'll be talking about some of them on the show. We never know.
Hopefully,
you never know how those things work.
Absolutely. No, and hopefully we'll be able to get the ones that I'm interested in again, because that's always the best way to work.
So we are kicking off today's episode with a big story with even bigger numbers, big numbers. So Saudi Arabia's huge numbers. Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, or the PIF as we'll refer to it likely moving forward, is moving $12 billion worth of its gaming shares over to its dedicated subsidiary, which is Savvy Games Group. So that means Savvy will now hold roughly 10% of quite a lot of some of the biggest studios in Japan. So we've got Nintendo, Square Enix, Bandai Namco. You can tell I'm reading here to make sure I get them right. Koei Tecmo and Nexon, amongst others. And they, of course, already own Scopely and a lot of esports infrastructure via ESL and Faceit. So Alex, what's your immediate thought on this?
2 immediate things. One is that Nexon's Korean, which I think, we'd lump them all in. I think we just said Japan at that point, but yes, absolutely.
Even in my script, behind the scenes, folks, I do have Korean in here, and I missed it out, so I do apologize.
No, I just wanted to be specific before somebody came and corrected us. We are aware.
We will correct ourselves.
I'm also still fascinated by the fact in Japan some of the things are reversed, because Tecmo Koei here, Koei Tecmo there, Namco Bandai there, Bandai Namco. It's a whole thing, but the PIF has been picking up a lot of these fairly large portions of companies for a while now. I mean, obviously Nintendo, huge. Capcom, absolutely massive. Still, I mean, it's an excuse for me to talk about Resident Evil again, I'm sure, at some point today.
Not
It's
again.
The very fact that it's there. But this makes sense. I mean, obviously they kind of picked up all these shares. And while obviously part of that, I'm sure, is to have like this diversified portfolio of investments, it makes absolute sense to give it to Savvy, who have the
fingers
infrastructure is the
in
wrong word.
the gaming pies.
I was going to awareness, I think is what I'm going for. The savvy. They have the savvy of the games
The savvy
industry.
knowledge.
The savvy knowledge of the games industry. So I think it was probably a bit of time coming. Why the purchases weren't originally made by Savvy, that would be something I'd be interested in knowing. But in essence, that's there. The one thing that I do note from this is that, and I think this is coming up in your notes, so I'm just going to jump to it, is the fact that EA, which is obviously about to be bought as this kind of $55 billion buyout, is still going to be held by the PIF, at least through this part of the process.
Yeah,
Whether that will change
there's that real.
I don't know.
Yeah, it could. I mean, that's true. It could be a similar situation where in a few years' time it does move. But I think that is something which is really interesting. I think it clearly shows that there is that desire to keep maybe the really high stake things separate for the moment. But I think to me, what's really interesting is it looks like rather than now these investments just being investments, it's turning into something where we move things into Savvy, and then Savvy has this opportunity to play a much bigger role in not necessarily how these companies are operating, because the share size is still quite small, but it's substantial enough that you've got to be thinking, well, in those boardroom conversations, at what point does that 10% become a big enough voice to start impacting things?
Absolutely. And I imagine that at some point in this, like Brian Ward, who's the CEO, I think this is the title of Savvy, I can imagine him like sitting on some of these boards. He's very aware of the industry, has been in it for decades through EA and Activision. So, he's accomplished.
He's very savvy.
He's very savvy. We're going to keep using that. So moving it into their portfolio makes a lot of sense. And I honestly wouldn't be surprised if, they've got these, they're taking stewardship of these, this portfolio. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see EA move under them once the deal's closed and that's all signed up. Because I imagine there might be things like, obviously the PIF has a larger war chest to play with than Savvy does. So maybe they want to secure all of that and like all of the legal things that are done over here with the PIF. And then once that ownership's there, it can be played around.
Wrap it up and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Well, not Merry Christmas
here's
necessarily,
your 55
but just
billion.
Yeah.
Man.
Happy birthday.
I thought I was good when I got mine on an iPhone.
That's still pretty good. I mean, is that the equivalent maybe of 12 billion in shares if we look at the proportionate net worths, maybe?
Probably more.
Something else which I think is worth mentioning is that, as we said before, when you look at the studios now and the publishers that these investments are in, Savvy has become a very influential minority shareholder in a lot of companies in the Eastern, if we look globally, in the East, in the Eastern side of game development. And that's in combination at the same time where we're seeing, and we'll come on to this in the next story, but we're seeing a real drop-off in investment from the West. So you've got, and I've put it in the little script that we have, and it's just this, it's a rhetorical question, but, I'm wondering, is Savvy in a position where they're the only entity with not necessarily a blank check mentality, but are they now going to look to keep expanding? Are they going to use this influence when a lot of other investments seem to be retreating?
Not massively across global economics, so I'm not going to pretend like this is some great insight. So not to say that, but I think they might be a bit unique in the sense that, a lot of their funding comes from the PIF, the Saudi Public Investment Fund. And I think, that very specifically Saudi Arabia is trying to move away from fossil fuels and kind of old investments. And so I think then possibly other people in the region are probably going to be a bit more bullish with where they're putting the money they have rather than holding on to it because they know what they've got to one of the more volatile, possibly depreciating assets. So I'm not sure that it's a blank check mentality. It's just sitting on what they have isn't likely to appreciate or be as safe as what other countries' investments may be in. So I don't think it's a blank check. I think it's just savvy investment.
And my last point would be, with my very small investment I do, Nintendo at the moment, they've had quite a big drop. They're down 30% in the last few months. So, maybe Savvy, if you're listening, now's the time. Get more into Nintendo. Would be my not. They definitely need my advice. They definitely need my advice on the matter. But it's 54 euros a share at the moment, I think. So now's the time before the big first party games get announced, and all of a sudden it rockets up. So
yeah. Well, if they get announced,
well, let's hope they do.
Yeah.
So from stocks and shares, we're now going to go on to mergers and acquisitions. So today's episode really is all about the numbers. And a new report from investment bank Ariam & Co. shows that there was just, I've put just here, but just 500 in video game merger and acquisition activity in the last quarter of 2025, which is an 89% drop against the same time in 2024. So I think my question is, for now, is the age of these mega mergers and big deals over? And another thing I did here is, has the industry gone, we're not feasting anymore? Are we into the snacking between meals phase of all this money play?
I like the idea that we're in a snacking between meals phase.
Just a penguin.
Yeah. I'm also sat here wondering if it's Ariam or Areem and Co. as the bank. But that's one of those things where, again, not a money person, so I have no clue.
Someone else can tell us.
Are we moving into a snacking period? Possibly. I think we've kind of hoovered up a lot of the biggies, haven't we? We're kind of, when I saw this story, I was like, I'm not surprised there's been a dip. Because if you look at the last few years, I think it was 2022 that the Activision Microsoft acquisition got kind of put in there. I think that's right.
That was 22.
Then last year, obviously, we had EA. There's all sorts of whatever's going on with Ubisoft. That might have been 2022 as well. Just when you look at all of what has been shifting and moving, the consolidation is, I don't think it's that there's less going on. I think it's the larger consolidation kind of happen in that kind of block. So unless those bigger companies start to give up those assets or sell on the numbers, it's going to become smaller as the push and pull becomes over. I mean, what's left? Take-Two, Ubisoft in the form it's in, all of the Japanese companies who were just discussing, if they come up for kind of acquisition at kind of a greater scale, if that's something that they're open to. It's become a much more consolidated environment, and I think the big money's been spent for a little while, especially at the moment when the industry itself is seeing consoles are like, they're projecting they're going to be a little bit further away. Obviously, GTA 6 is a bit further away than we thought it was going to be, and who knows if it's going to be even further away with everything else going on with Rockstar at the moment. All of that stopping people.
We're going to avoid it this episode.
Yeah, rising console prices. Like we're seeing a kind of like the uptake of the current machines and isn't quite as high. The console sales over the last quarter weren't as high as perhaps some people anticipate, especially for Xbox. And I think it's just this kind of chilling effect where people are just getting a little bit less bullish.
I think everything you're saying, we're seeing loads of restructuring, we're seeing loads of consolidation. I think you're right, Alex. I think a lot of these big studios and big companies, they've made these moves over the past couple of years, and now a lot of them are looking at restructuring because they need it to survive. There's a lot of, I think you can look at Coffee Stain leaving, spinning out of Embracer last year. That was a really big deal in terms of public financing. So you've got situations like that where studios and smaller companies within conglomerates are spinning out of having previously been bought by someone like Embracer that are now leaving. So you're seeing a lot of that. And I think something which I mentioned to you before we started recording, and to me what's really interesting about this story is that there's an estimated over $100 billion in cash. Obviously, I don't think there's a Scrooge McDuck style vault at Nintendo, but a lot of these bigger giants, so your Sonys, your Take-Twos, like you mentioned, your Nintendos, they're sitting on a lot of money, not necessarily to hoard it, but that money that was being spent hasn't just disappeared. It's just a case now that these companies are sat there with it. Again, a point that I made to you before we started, is this a case where by the end of this year, moving into 2027, is the market going to, level out a little bit? People are looking at this year potentially thinking things might start to be more optimistic again. Are we then going to see this situation change? And a lot of these companies are going to start not necessarily going out and doing another Activision, Microsoft style, 70 billion deal, but will these companies, having held onto this cash for so long, then later start moving it out again once there is a bit more stability?
Yeah, I don't know is the answer. The hope is there, and obviously,
Thought you were the oracle.
Well, that's true. But it's when you look at, with everybody being laid off and some of those being senior, you're going to see probably a lot of new studios starting up out of the back of that. And I know that's one of those weird things that happened with, was it Nexon that did Marvel Rivals? Because they obviously laid off
NetEase.
They laid off a lot of their American studios that were kind of helping them with the development of that game, and those were a load of studios, kind of then unknown names, but with industry
known
veterans
talent.
heading them up. Known talent, exactly, who've spun out of other studios because they were let go. So you end up in this place where there are these studios that maybe aren't very well known, but likely have lower overheads because they started more recently. They probably don't have real estate that they're operating from. They probably don't have offices in the traditional sense. They've probably done a lot that kind of streamlines that process to keep their costs as low as possible. So you might see like lower investment in these smaller studios that are kind of cropping up and that have proven talent, but not the proven name recognition, and even like have delivered on fantastic products, but the publisher and developer sits and owns that elsewhere, and they was kind of support studios. So I wonder if that's going to be where we see investment coming up as well.
Yeah, and I think that would, that late 26, early 27 timeline that I just invented in my head earlier, there's no substance to that necessarily, but I think that makes sense to some degree with what you're saying. Maybe we are going to see, and I think we've seen it over the past few years with these studios popping up from, I won't reference Mind's Eye because that was a complete disaster, but we've seen in the past these studios pop up with a lot of established talent behind them. And are we going to see, with the layoffs of the past few years, more of these popping up? And then these studios that are sitting on this money then might turn around and be like, okay, we can maybe start to make some of these, put some of this smaller investment out there again and see how things look, because we trust these people. We don't know their studio, but we trust the people who.
Well, not to take a huge step back in that conversation as well, though, but then you've got to look at something like Tango Gameworks, which obviously incredible talent behind that, made Hi-Fi Rush. I always get the name wrong. Is that the right one?
Brilliant game.
Yeah, and obviously they have a bit more legacy to them because they have a good old Evil Within in there and Tokyo Wire as well. But you've got this selection of things, and that's become like a hot potato. They've shifted from like bought up by Bethesda or Activision, and then passed over again to a Korean company, and I can't remember which one that is. It's either NCSoft, NetEase, or Nexon. Too many N's. That's what I'm learning in that.
Yeah, that's the problem.
I think it was Nexon.
That is the issue. Too many. We need new names. We need new letters at the start of these companies. People, come on.
Yeah,
make it less confusing for us.
So that the hope is that in that, like, there's enough within that investment. It's not short term, and people realize how long it takes to make a game of the quality that they're probably anticipating off the back of this work.
100%. I think that makes.
I feel like we've touched on a lot of points there. I hope we
have, but I think it's the headline is one thing, but there's a lot more information. And as always, I think before we wrap this section, my last point, we always make it. All of the stories we talk about, you can find the links to them below. So I always recommend go and have a look, go and read it for yourself, and you can make your own judgments with the information that they contain. To round off today's edition of the Weekly Download, we're going to go back into the AI conversation, but I think I've got something interesting for you this week, Alex. So we're going to be taking a look at two wildly different takes. So we've got Stellar Blade developer Shift Up, and then we've got Games Workshop. Now, Alex is a massive Warhammer fan, so we'll try and keep him from straying.
Overselling it.
You are.
But yes.
He loves doing his painting. So we're going to be looking at Games Workshop's take as well. Now, this is a bit like, for all the Star Wars fans out there, or not, this is a bit like the Galactic Civil War. but we've got less Death Stars and more AI-powered tools.
And
Shout out to
cloning,
the battle
actually, this
droids.
works quite well, which is something I'm going to get
Exactly.
onto that you haven't touched on in your notes. So we'll address that in a moment.
Okay, so yeah, we've got Hyung Tae Kim, who is the director of Stellar Blade, who essentially has argued that to him, AI is essential. Didn't mean to use that twice very quickly, but he thinks that AI is essential for survival against the really big development studios within China and the US in comparison to Korea. Now, on the flip side of that, and we'll be going back and forth a bit with this one, but on the flip side, Games Workshop CEO Kevin Roundtree has come out and said that at Games Workshop, they have prohibited the use of generative AI in their design processes, and that's not necessarily a decision from the right at the top, but more that a lot of the senior managers at Games Workshop have got personal grievances with the use of AI. And what was really interesting to me was that he brought up the fact that they really dislike that a lot of devices and web tools and such are forcing them into using AI without any user consent, essentially. So we've got the two sides here. There's more details, but Alex, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this galactic civil war.
So many thoughts. So you bring it up. I'll start with very quickly the idea that Stellar Blade, which hold absolute millions, and they require AI. Like if they're developing one game at a time and they've got all that money, I'm sure they can take a little bit of that cash and invest it in people where they need to. But and again, we have this debate every time. It's like, what do they mean by AI is essential? Do they mean for streamlining processes, or do they mean for creating the art and the game? Like, there's degrees here that are not being touched on in the story, I imagine.
I think one of the things that that I take, again, links to these will be in the description of all of wherever you're watching or listening. But what I take from what he's saying is that ShiftUp has 150, 160 employees, whereas a lot of their competitors in China have up to 2,000. So his logic is, and this is something I'm not 100% agreeing with. His argument is that one ShiftUp employee who's amazing at using AI and AI proficient can do the work of 100 people is one of these points that he makes. So for him, it's a question of scaling up. Now, I'll let you make any comments you wish. I personally think the idea that one person who can use AI really well can do what 100 people can do feels a bit optimistic.
And perhaps a bit misleading in terms of what those 100 people are doing in that process. Like,
true, that's true.
I mean, and you've got to look at this idea that 50 people can't do it. I feel like I want to say Nier Automata. That's not. I mean, Claire Obscura 33 did it with 50, but they didn't do it with 50 people. But they outsourced and they pulled in people where it was necessary.
But the core development team was under 40.
So the idea that
it's got.
So the idea that that 150 people isn't enough to deliver a top quality game, especially when Stellar Blade came out in like 2024 and was also one of the bigger games of that year, with the staff they had, screams as a little bit disingenuous. Again, if they're using it for some things in-house that you kind of help with storyboards, not that I necessarily think storyboards should be done with AI, but all that sliding scale, it would be interesting to see behind the curtain and what's going on there. Games Workshop, however, it's interesting that it's it's interesting that they're quite as bullish on that. I'm glad to hear they are. It's good to have, on the plus side for this, when it comes to the conversation, it is at least absolutely clear. There is no stratosphere. There's no
experimentation or...
Yeah, if it's not like there, you said,
they're being very, to me, as someone who's not in the world of Games Workshop, I think, again, I'm saying it's investment corner again. I like Games Workshop as a company. I think they're a very good company. I do dabble investing in a bit of Games Workshop because I think they've got some very good. They're very good at what they do, and they're very much cornered that market. And I think this is just the right position for them to be in as a company, doubling down on human talent. This conversation about AI also saw Roundtree speak about they're looking to bring in more creatives, more writers, more sculptors. This idea of positioning Games Workshop as this human first, human made company.
but they're not being like handmade in the way, or hand crafted, hand designed is the way they used to be. Like a lot of it's done on computer. One of the big complaints within the industry is that, or within the community, is that, that you've got these very expensive resin models, some of which are like, they're quite small, but they're going for like 20, 30 quid because they are kind of commanders, that they're very intricately detailed. You get kind of like squads of the basic, I'm going to use Marines because they're the most well known and the easiest.
Go off, Alex, please.
But within those sets, within the kind of squad sets, you'll get repetition, you'll get things that are quite obviously repeated. And then also in some of these small kind of, I'm going to call them bespoke, like little ones, you'll also see some repeated sculpt elements. So essentially, while they're not using AI, they are cutting up and sticking back together things that exist already. So if you're not doing something new and then you're sat there touting, or you're, we can still make 500 models through this kind of mix and match, and then 2 or 3 a year will be absolutely unique, and then we'll butcher them for the next round. And again, I collect the Underworld sets because they're kind of, you buy them and they're complete. They're one squad in themselves, and then I don't get sucked into buying entire armies, which is what happened through my youth. But all of them are very unique and beautifully detailed. But now you're seeing those pulled into squads within the broader game. So it's like, it's all very well. It's great to sit there and have this very distinct thing. But ultimately, if your part of your sculpt process is sticking together things you already have, like a puzzle, then
a little bit disingenuous.
Exactly. Like you have a pipeline that's incredibly efficient, and that's fantastic, and it's working. You've got an interesting business model. It's a great hobby for dozens of reasons. But let's not pretend that you haven't done things to optimize that in a way a lot of perhaps game development studios like Shift Up are
looking to use AI.
Aren't able to, unless they file off Stellar Blade and swap the lead character and change some bits here and there, and then put it out again. I mean,
copy and paste
that might be what Stellar Blade 2 ends up being. So
maybe. I mean, I think you've made a really good point there. I don't have anything to add on that specifically. I think it's
because you didn't know that was coming.
No, I didn't, but it's a really good point, and I think it's interesting as much as you can. It is. From Games Workshop's perspective, for them to declare this, they're very much standing where they are, but they're not perfect, but that's the reality of a lot of these companies, isn't it? But I think as you've said, and I think the last thing I'd say is just what you've said in terms of it's the fact they've been so bullish on this is interesting. I wonder if we will see more studios, more publishers, especially this year, because I feel like for a lot of them, it's either you're using it to do not everything, but you're embracing it, or you're not. I feel like across the year, we're going to see a lot more people and CEOs coming out and pinning their flag to the mast, and they'll either be on one side or the other. And I think this is not the first, but I think this is the start of that trend this year.
We absolutely touched on bits of this last time, but I think what we're going to what I think makes sense, whether we see it or not, I don't know. But on somewhere like Steam, whether they're going to start having like, in the same way the ESRB ratings and what have you, have like, scary content, swearing, like all the different things. If you're going to have AI used in X, AI used in Y, X, AI used in Z.
Yeah, well, you
so
have,
people can
you
make
have
up their own mind.
the disclaimer, don't you? But it'll be interesting if they break
it's a catch-all for everything.
More.
I think they're going to have to, because people are becoming so resilient, or so, many people are becoming so anti, but at the same time, I think they're misunderstanding what's there. And I don't think Steam can be there not allowing, but that's definitely the wrong term, but not giving that level of detail, because it could be like, we used AI, we produced this copy, we used AI to go through it and make sure that it was like accurate and consistent in the writing, which, a lot Grammarly and what have you has like rewriting things in there. Does that count? Well, is it just for art assets? Is it for storyboarding? Are there AI generated assets in the final product? Were they used in? So there's so many levels that it can be at, that I think they're going to have to start giving some breakdown where people are able to make up their own mind
to
about
make an informed decision.
Exactly. That's the phrase I was looking for. Thank you, Tom.
And I think that's a perfect place to wrap, because both of us have made quite a strong prediction about slightly different things. So we can revisit this at the end of the year and see who's right, see who's wrong. Hopefully we're both right, but we'll see. And now it's time, just before we finish this week's episode, for the week's rapid rundown and continuing on with our self-shaming, I think, Lego chat last week. Alex, I wanted to ask for your quick take on the biggest Lego news. I do think this is a really big story this week. And, we're seeing the Lego Pokemon collaboration revealed, the first sets, and the Generation 1 starter set, which does look very cool, but it's going to cost $650. And for anyone in the UK, the exchange rates have not been kind. I believe it's £579. So, Alex, your thoughts on all things Lego Pokemon?
First thing, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. I don't know how big it is, but it's significantly more than the old Enterprise here, and this thing ain't small. I know they have two other
a bit
sets,
more colourful, at least.
Yeah. But that's a lot to come out the gate with their. I know they have the two smaller ones, but you've got the Deku Tree behind you, which obviously Zelda was looked around. It was kind of hoped for a long time. Significantly more affordable, and even I thought that was a bit bold coming out with that as their first kind of gambit in the world of Zelda, with how much there is that they could have captured in that. But I think they've been very smart with the selection they've picked. Obviously, the original 151, which are the only ones worth looking at, really, if we break it down. But that starter set obviously calls
very
back
controversial.
I know. That set's probably got the strongest nostalgia with people with the most spending power at the moment. So I think it sits in quite a smart place.
That was my takeaway. I've seen a lot of people complain about the price. I think it's fair enough. I think we've already had the leaks that say that there's going to be a lot of more child-oriented sets in the summer.
Yeah.
These were like the big, bold Generation 1 games. 30 years? It's 30 years this year, my word. That's aged me very quickly.
Yeah, I was going to say it must be
So it's expensive, but I think, like you said, people need to keep forgetting that Lego target adults as much as they do kids at this point. I don't think anyone's expecting a 10-year-old to afford even the Pikachu set that's about 150. So,
I do think that's the problem with it being the first kind of lead set out, is that kids who are massively into Pokemon, if they get it in their heads that it's what they want.
The little wallet. I ain't got enough.
No. But also, it won't be a fun set for them as well. I just feel like this is like one of those situations where they should have led with the colourful, playful ones and been like, don't worry, the one for like collectors is coming. I just feel like this is maybe the wrong way round.
No, I wouldn't disagree. Lego expensive, Pokemon expensive, Lego and Pokemon double expensive. Something else which is making a lot of money for someone. What a segue! That's making a lot of money. Last week we're always talking about Xbox. I know we touched on them last week, but we've had some data this week, I believe, from Linear Analytics, very good measuring, analysts around sales and such. And they think that Forza Horizon 5 has shifted about 5 million units on the PS5, and it launched in April last year. And I think it shows what we said last week. Suddenly, Xbox's third-party plan makes a lot more sense when this kind of data is coming out.
And I think probably massively helped by the racing genre is so hugely popular, but it's popular because people have the fanaticism around cars. And, I was about to call it Grand Theft Auto.
For context, out of shot, just down here, you can't see it, but I've got my racing seat and wheel and pedals and everything. So this is, hello, it's me.
But exactly. But then you've got Gran Turismo, it kind of sits there, but has there been one on the latest?
There's 7, but that's 5-6 years old at this point.
Yeah.
I think, this is, we've spoken about this so many times. It makes total sense for Xbox to do this. This is 5 million sales they're not getting on Xbox. It's probably already sold more on PS5 than it has on Xbox. And I'd even say maybe PC as well, because the PS5 has got, as you've said, it's already got that, a lot of people I know that play racing games, it's all they play. It's very much a market where if there's a big new shiny game coming out, I know this was PS5 Pro compatible at launch as well, and it's a match made in heaven. And I think, yeah, Xbox are, as I said last week, they're kind of Sega-fying themselves, but Sega, it kind of worked out for Sega, and I think it'll work for Xbox as long as they're happy to accept that they're going to become a third party and make loads of money selling software, which could be a lot worse.
If they're selling it through their own storefront, or they have a portal that takes you into Xbox, as they do on PC, and they put that on other platforms, then they keep greater control over even that. Then, but perhaps with even more success than Sega. I mean, possibly that goes without saying.
Yeah, no, it's not. No. I grew up playing Sonic, but yeah, come on, Sega. Well done, Sega. You're still there. Is all. Well done, Sega. You're still going. Sonic's still going.
Virtual Fighter 5.
There's probably another film coming out at some point. But that's a wrap for this week. Thank you, as always, to anyone listening, watching, however you're tuning in. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Weekly Download. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Like I said, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe. If you're on Apple, if you're on Spotify, wherever you're listening, please subscribe to stay in the loop. Now, if you'd rather read your news, which is perfectly fine, if you'd rather wish to do that, then be sure to subscribe to the Weekly Download newsletter, which is available via LinkedIn, and you can find that in the description. And if you want even more news, if you want all the biggest stories to your inbox 5 days a week, be sure to sign up for the daily download. You'll get a bunch of stories every single day. You'll get to see the latest events, where they are, how you can get tickets and such. And as always, we'll be back next week with even more stories, even more trends, and even more just funny moments where Alex goes off completely off script and I'm just sat here going, yes, Alex, tell me about Warhammer. But until then,
Resident Evil.
We'll catch you next time.